Okay, so we're ready to deal with the water now. This is our placeholder, and what we're going to do is very simple. We are going to go to our library. We're going to go to liquids, and we're going to pull out our water. And these are all the various output nodes that we had created when we made the water. And I'm just going to take the color for now. Oops, didn't want to do that one. And we're just going to plug that in. So now we have our watercolor from the original material that we had made and put in our library. Pretty straightforward. What we can also do, since we have it at the ready, we can replace, you know what? No, let's not do that. We're going to get to the normal soon enough, and we might as well do it in order. What I'd like to get to first, I think, before we do the normals on the water, is to create that shoreline. You know, the tide line is probably a better word for it, that will expose that underneath color that we had so we can draw this water back. Again, that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. And to do that, we're going to use a bevel node. I think it's in here. Yeah. Okay. I love bevels. It does exactly what it says it does. It creates a bevel from the white areas off of whatever map you feed into it. You can have an angular bevel, or we're going to stick with the round, and you can adjust the distance from 0 to, well, actually, that's the two, we'll keep it at 256. So as I pull this number into the positive, it's making that white bigger, and it's kind of eroding in on that black, but it's not doing it like a blur would do it. It's doing it in a very controlled way, and it's keeping to those edges. So it's beveling that edge, and it's giving me a gradient between there. If I go into the negative numbers, it eats into my white. For this particular map, I chose not to do that. I ended up, when we exposed this, I ended up blocking it at 0. But if you want your lands to start to get completely eroded by water, that's a doable thing. So for now, we'll keep it at 0. And then the other nice thing about bevels, you'll notice, it will generate for you a handy dandy normal map that will correspond to whatever it is you're doing here. So it's a great little node that I use quite often. And what we're going to do with it, it's that simple. We are going to create an input parameter that will allow us to do that. So why don't we go ahead and do that? And we're going to call this shoreline, or we can call it tide line. It's probably better. And we're going to put it in our water group. You know what we're also going to do? We're going to go ahead and we're going to make our default 0. And we're going to make our maximum 1, and we're going to make our minimum 0, and I'm going to clamp that. So it will be clamped as far as people being able to go beyond those parameters. Right, so instead of, for our water, instead of using the ledge now, what we're going to do is we're going to replace it with our tide line. So right now, you know, it's the same thing because we've got it set to 0. But let's publish it out and see what happens when we move that slider now. Right? So we now have, oh, you know, I always do that. Let's go ahead and actually expose that. So we're exposing distance. And we're going to call it, where are we? Tide line. I always do that. I don't know why I do that, but I always do that. Here we go. So as we move this number up, I think I'm going to lower it. I'm not going to have it go all the way to 1 because I'd like to have some water left over. So I'm going to find that spot right now where I think we'll go with 0.3. I think 0.3 will be a good number to set that maximum at. But here we have this adjustable tide line now. And all we're doing is we're moving that bevel in and out. Pretty simple. So before we forget, let's set that maximum to 0.3. Done. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is we're going to work on what I want to do is I want to create like a little foam edge that goes along here that'll have kind of like a little animation so it looks like, you know, it's actually hitting up against the rocks a little bit and making a little bit of foam. And we'll run it, we can I think we'll give it its own simple little animation. So again, we're going to start, it's going to be kind of the same. I'm going to mark this out. I want to make sure I don't confuse these two, so I'm actually going to right click, add a frame, and call it tide line. Because those maps, just to look at them, they look exactly the same, and it can be confusing. So this time, I don't want to use the bevel. I want to create its own fuzziness around the edge, but it's the same principle. I'm just going to do a blur now instead. And the size of this blur is going to determine how far out from the shore that foam is going to reach out. And we're gonna block all this out. Again, it's pretty straightforward, but let's make a parameter now. And this one we're going to call foam size.
Yes, this is real music.
Sorry, phone. Okay, where were we? We're making, okay. So let's make these input parameters. So we're doing foam size, and we're going to put that in the water group. Now this is a blur, so I'm going to have this default as 0. And we will make the maximum, though, a bit higher. So let's go with 10, because we don't want it to cover up everything. You can always come back and change that. So let's remember to actually expose it this time around. So we're going to set the parameter that way. And now we're going to, so this is our sort of edge blur here. And now we're going to warp it. We don't want, if we left it like this and we overlaid it on the water, our foam would be the same size regardless of where, I mean, it's always going to stay the same. So if you imagine that shoreline kind of, if it going out from the shoreline, this difference is going to stay the same, and it's going to just kind of sit there, and it's not going to look very much like foam. What we wanted to do is kind of move around a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a warp, and I'm going to get, and we're going to pick up this clouds 3 again because that's nice. Let's put that into a blur node because we got this one out. We might as well use it. Looks pretty good the way it is. And let's get a pixel processor and put a bit of a spin on this guy. So we'll put that in there. We'll double click on our pixel processor. We'll click edit. We'll get rid of this float 4. And again, we're just going to put a very simple get float 2. We're going to get a add node variables. We're going to get float. Now, I ended up, initially I did a variable on this as far as for my time. In other words, to control how fast I wanted this to go. It ended up being such a small number and didn't make that much of a difference. So what I ended up doing was instead just doing a constant, and I set it at, I think, like 0.0125. Again, if this is something that you want to expose and have people adjust, that's entirely up to you. Now we're going to take these two numbers and we're going to multiply them. So this is going to give us our time. This is going to be our position. And all we need now, well, we also need an output node. Sample color. I'm going to set that as output. And now we're going to come up to our library and we're going to get a rotation. And we are done. So this is going to rotate the position of this warp according to this time frame. So now we've got this mask. Oh, let's go back to our pixel processor and set it as a grayscale. We're now going to warp this blurred image. So we've set the size of our foam area with this blur, and then we're going to take that and we're going to mess around with it. So again, let's set this up for a moment where we can kind of see what happens. So let's set our foam size pretty big. So instead of having just this straight edge, we now have a bit of a blur to it, and then this blur is kind of moving. So that's great. But this is showing our white areas are now so much more than just the water. It's actually, you know, if we did it this way, foam would be all over everything. So we've really got, well, we've got two more steps, but one more basic step to do, which is to cut out everything except for what we want to have as our foam. So I'm going to get another blend. And I'm going to plug in my result from the warp up top. And then I'm going to go to my ledge. And what I want to show is this area in black. So what I end up needing to do is to invert that map. I'm going to invert grayscale. I'm going to plug that in there. So I've now got an inverse of that map, which I will now plug into here. And what that's going to do for me is it's going to cut out everything except my foam. So what happened was is that, I had what was, I had going in here, I had going on what I wanted to go on inside the water, but I was still left with all this stuff outside here that I don't want. So that's what I did by just inverting this map and not inverting, not the tide line, but the actual cutout. It's just going to delineate that shoreline in a negative way, leaving me with only my foam. And again, this last one, we're going to leave this really low res. And what ended up happening once I overlaid this on the larger map, I wasn't getting enough white areas. So before we finish with this and get our final foam map, what we're going to do is we're going to just bring these levels up. We're going to bring in more whites. Just get it a bit more contrasty. Yeah, and again, we can fool around with that later. And now what this has done, so let's get organized here. We're getting a little disorganized. Let's make a frame around this, and we're going to call this foam. And now we're going to apply it to a color. So let's just, I don't know how we're going to do, you know what, let's just plug this into here, and we'll pick up a nice seafoam gradient. We want to keep this uber simple, like 2, maybe 3 colors, and they're all really close to each other. So how about this? Again, let's pick up our gradient editor. I hate not having 2 screens. It absolutely drives me up the wall. Right, so let's pick our gradient, and we're going to stick to these really white areas here. That's pretty good. It's very light. It's just to keep it from being all the same color is really what you're looking for. So this is our color, and we're going to blend it with our water. Okay, oops. So that's all of our foam, and then we're going to subtract out what's not our foam. So we now have a bunch of water with some foam that will be moving around. So we now replace our plain old water with our foamy water. And it's a much higher we don't need that. In fact, we could probably even lower this water down some. If it starts giving us performance problems, that's the first thing that's going to happen, is this going to get dropped down to 128 by 128. But you now start seeing this foam in here, so let's clean these up first. I got a bunch of extra nodes in here. I'm just going to hit clean. It's going to get rid of what's not working. And let's organize our color a little bit. I like to have my maps out here so I can see them. And we're going to add a frame, and we're going to call it color. And we can add another frame and call this one water. And having frames makes it really easy to sort of move these things around as a group. Yeah, we'll just kind of leave this unnamed right now. It's not really bothering me. Um, so here we are. We've worked out our watercolor. Let's take a, I'm just going to make sure I exposed what I needed to expose because I'm stupid like that. Exposed. Very good. Okay. And here we go. We've got water. Now, our water itself isn't animated, but we can turn this on and see. Yeah, so we're getting this. That's our foam mask. I don't know if I'm liking that pixelation in there, but again, that's something we can easily take care of, I'm sure. Uh, but it's doing what it needs to do. And let's just make sure that our foam size is also working. So as we move that slider out, that foam gets foamier or less foamy. So I'd say we have successfully put in our water foam. I think we're coming up on time. I was hoping to get to the normals on this one, but I guess not. So normals are pretty straightforward. Again, we're going to start drawing off of these maps to make a normal, and we have our animated water normal already here with our water. So we're just going to take this normal and we're going to attach it to, we're going to blend it in with the normals that we're going to make from this stuff. And then we have a roughness map and then we'll be done. So we're almost there. So far so good, and I'll see you in the next video.